Canelé are one of my favourite things in the entire world. I serve them with tea and coffee at the end of my tasting menu, and while they can be a little bit fiddly to make, today I'm going to share my tried and tested recipe and method with you. I first came across Canelé when I was travelling around France with my fiancée a couple of years ago, and we both loved them straight away, but it took me quite a while longer to find a method and a technique for making them that I was really happy with. They're these little cakes which are flavoured with rum and vanilla, and they're caramelised and crispy on the outside and almost custardy on the inside. They are super French, super delicious, and I just totally love them. There's a couple of things that you need to consider if you want to make Canelé, but probably the main one is what sort of moulds you're going to use. Now traditionally they're made using these little fluted copper moulds which are lined with a beeswax mixture, and that's what I do myself. I have tried making them with silicone moulds as well, but I just could not get a result that was anywhere near to as good as I got with the copper ones. The next thing you need to be aware of is thinking a little bit ahead with this recipe. Once you've made the batter for the cakes, that needs to rest in the fridge for at least 24 hours, and that makes a real difference to the quality of your finished Canelé. Making the Canelé with the copper moulds, you need to line them with a beeswax and butter mixture to make them non-stick. And that beeswax is really important both in terms of flavour and in terms of giving you a nice crisp finish to your Canelé. And the last thing to note on the Canelé is the cooking times and temperatures. I cook mine at 2 different temperatures and they have to be turned intermittently, which makes them a little bit of an awkward thing to cook. You have to be quite aware of what you're doing. However, for all of these factors, they are so delicious, so fun to make. I honestly think if you make them once and you have success, you will be utterly hooked on them. I've got beehives in the garden, so I've always got a readily available source of beeswax on hand, but you can also buy food grade beeswax easily online these days. I use a mixture of beeswax and clarified butter to coat the copper moulds, and I warm this up to 65 degrees and also warm the copper moulds themselves up to 65 degrees to make it that little bit easier to coat them. I fill the copper moulds with the mixture, and just when you see it starting to set at the edges, you pour out the excess and then leave them to set. The full recipe for the Canelé will be in the description, but I'll walk you through it here too. So we start off with 940 grams of whole milk and the seeds of 2 vanilla pods. These get warmed up to 90 degrees and then I allow that to cool back down to about 70 degrees. Then I'm going to take 200 grams of plain flour, 440 grams of caster sugar, and rub in 100 grams of butter at room temperature, just until we get a nice consistency like breadcrumbs. Then we're going to add in half of our warmed vanilla milk mixture and half of our egg yolks and half of our egg whites, and just mix that together nicely until it forms a smooth batter. Then we'll add in the rest of the milk, the rest of the egg yolks and the rest of the egg whites, and just mix that together well. Lastly, a key flavour in Canelé is dark spiced rum, and so I like to use a local rum from Salford, not too far away from where I'm based. Finally, we strain the batter through a fine sieve or a chinois and rest it in the fridge for at least 24 hours, but even 48 hours would be ideal. When it comes to filling the moulds, my moulds use about 40 grams of batter, and you want to fill them to just under the rim. Then they get baked in the oven and they get regularly turned during this process. So they start off at 260 degrees, they get turned after 5 minutes, and then they get another 5 minutes at 260 degrees. Then I drop the temperature to 220 degrees, they get turned every 10 minutes, and for the last 10 minutes of cooking, they're covered over with foil to stop them browning too much. Then once they're cooked, you want to tip them out of the moulds as quickly as possible whilst they're still warm. And what you're looking for is for your Canelé to have a crisp caramelised outer shell, but inside to be soft, just barely set, almost custardy. I can see how this recipe might be a bit intimidating to some people, but when you break it down, it's not actually all that difficult. At the end, you'll have these beautiful little cakes, which are just so much better than the sum of their parts. It's really hard to describe quite how delicious and why these are so good, but they are really, really addictively excellent. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give me a like and hit subscribe. And if you have questions about recipes like this, you can always ask them to me over on my Patreon page, where you can also get early access to videos, other recipes, and a bunch of other benefits. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.